Well, it definitely got windier faster than the weather app anticipated. What's up, guys? Welcome to another super bright, super windy New Mexico day. I'm out here because I'm testing out this guy. This is a little panning time-lapsey thing, which is totally irrelevant to this video, but I figured I had a while and I was hoping the wind wouldn't kick up. So we're just gonna fingers crossed that it stays like less than 20 miles an hour right now. So I've been reading my comments on some of my other S20 videos, and you guys, a lot of you are still asking questions about the Pro mode and asked if I can do just a straight up S20 Pro mode stills video. So that's what this is gonna be. I have done this before with a lot of other Samsung phones, actually, this exact same video. I've done the Pro mode for all of the recent phones, basically. And I'm gonna go ahead and do it for this one because you guys are asking, because what I realized is that there are a lot of you who are either new to Samsung, new to Android, or just new to the S20 and haven't used Pro mode before, and you might not have watched my Note 10 or thought to watch a Note 10 or S10 Pro mode video. So this video is for you guys. If you've already come from a Samsung phone and you've already messed around with Pro mode, then it's gonna be pretty much the same. If you've already seen my other Pro mode videos, then there's not really gonna be anything new here. So this is just for people who are new to the S20 and new to Pro mode overall. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you, I've got my phone set up here. We're gonna jump into the phone and I'm gonna go ahead and walk you through all of the settings in Pro mode. And then after that, I'm gonna go through and talk a little bit about the whens and the whys and the hows of using Pro mode and how I use it and why I use it and when I use it and all that kind of stuff and how it will benefit you. But let's go ahead and hop into the phone and get started and I'll show you around. All right, so let's go ahead and open up the app. By default, it's gonna be in photo mode. So I'm gonna swipe over here to get to my Pro mode. Now I put it over here to the left. You guys can put it wherever you want. If you didn't know how to do that, you can. So all you have to do is scroll all the way over to the more, hit this pencil icon, and then drag whatever you want into that whatever spot you want it, and then hit save. So that's how I have mine set up. And like I said, you can do that any way you want, but I put Pro mode all the way over here to the left. So let's talk about the settings real quick, because the first thing you're gonna wanna do to utilize the most out of Pro mode, to get the most out of Pro mode, is shoot in RAW. And if you don't know what RAW is, I have a whole video on that. You can learn why and when and how you'd wanna shoot in RAW. But basically RAW means that it's not gonna compress the image when it saves it, and you're gonna have all of that data to mess with in editing and all of that stuff. So you're gonna go into your camera settings and we're gonna scroll down to save options, and then we're gonna, by default, this save raw copies is gonna be turned off, so we're gonna turn that on. So that will allow you to shoot both a RAW and a JPEG. It'll give you both of those images and it will compress the JPEG and do all of that stuff to it that it normally does. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go ahead and look at our options here in Pro mode. So I'm gonna start off at the bottom here and we're gonna go with ISO. So if you don't know what ISO is, I have a photography basics class on that you can check out. But basically ISO is light sensitivity. How sensitive to light is the sensor? And you can see that its base ISO, the lowest it can go is 50, and that's gonna give you the cleanest image. And by clean, I mean noise free. So when we slide this up, it's gonna be more sensitive to light. So it's letting more light hit the sensor, or the sensor is absorbing more light. Basically, it's more sensitive. And as we do that, it gets super bright. So it can go all the way up to 3200 ISO, and that's gonna be really good for nighttime stuff. But obviously during the daytime, you wanna keep it as low as possible. So that's ISO. The next thing we have is shutter speed. And shutter speed controls the length of time which your shutter is open. So right now it was set to 1/2000th of a second. So it can go all the way from 1/12,000th of a second, which is pretty fast, all the way to 30 seconds. So we can keep our shutter open for 30 seconds. That's also gonna come in handy for nighttime stuff, star trails, light trails, all of that good stuff. And with the shutter speed and everything else on here, you have the option to do manual or automatic. So if I click there, you see the yellow auto is lit up. That means that it's going to determine the shutter speed for you for what it thinks is correct. So right now it thinks 1/4000th is correct, and that looks a little bit dark. So I could override it just by grabbing it and pulling it down, and that's going to make it brighter. So maybe right there is where I think it is, and then that will automatically switch it to manual. So the next thing up is the picture profiles. So this is where you can customize the look of your image without editing it or before editing it. And you can do things to the temperature. You can boost that up. You can change the tint a little bit, the contrast. You can make it super contrasty or a little bit flatter. I'm gonna go ahead and reset this though, because I like to just keep it standard and then just do my editing in Photoshop or whatever I use, Snapseed. So as I was saying before I cut myself off, the sharpening is not as bad in Pro mode because it doesn't apply, it's not doing the JPEG and it's not doing all of that stuff to the image, so it's not gonna sharpen it as much. So if you're not a fan of the over sharpening look that the Samsungs have on their JPEG images in their regular mode, then this is a great time to use Pro mode. And if you're not a fan of like the colors or the contrast or the sharpening or anything like that it does to that Samsung does to that, then Pro mode is going to be great for you to be able to do all of that stuff and not have the phone do it. So the next thing here is autofocus, and the cool thing about the autofocus is that it does have an auto mode. So if you don't want to hassle with it and you trust the autofocus, which as of right now at the recording of this video is pretty good, because I do have the update, the autofocus update that they did do, Samsung put it out, and I've finally received it, and I can report that it is working quite well. So I don't have any problems recommending autofocus in any of the modes if that's what you need. But here there is a manual mode, so we can go from this little flower guy, which is macro, and you'll notice that everything is blurry. So if I stick my hand there, now you can see that it's focused on stuff that's really close up. And if I slide this up, now you'll see that I'm going towards the mountain symbol, that the mountains are now in focus and my hand is blurry. So it also should show your focus peaking, so you'll see this green on the screen there, and everything that's in green is in focus. So if we slide all the way up, then we're seeing the mountain and the horizon line has a little green line over it, meaning that that's in focus now. And if I do this, now you'll see a little bit of green on the highlights of my ring there, and you'll see that that means it's in focus. So focus peaking is really handy, and that's there to help you really nail the focus in manual mode. Or like I said, you can just click the auto mode and it will snap to it and try to do its best there. If I take it away, then now it's auto focusing on wherever it thinks it needs to be. So the next up is white balance, and white balance controls the color temperature of the image. I also have a video on white balance if you want to check that out and learn more in detail about white balance and how that affects your images. But you can see it pretty easily on here. Right now it is set to 5200 Kelvin, which is about, if I do it to manual, it's setting it to 4800. So that's what it thinks the ambient temperature of the light is out here. So we can adjust that though, and we can say, no, I want it a little warmer, and bring it up, and it goes all the way to 10,000. Or we can say, no, I want it a little bit colder, a little bit cooler, which is the blue colors, and bring it down all the way to 2300. So normal daylight is considered usually around 52 to 5500 Kelvin. So that is what I would consider daylight. That's what most things consider normal daylight. And then I can just lock it down there and leave it in manual, and I'm good to go. Or if I want the camera to do it again, even in Pro mode, I can switch to auto, and you can see it cooled it down a little bit because it thinks it's about 4900 Kelvin out here, which I think is a little bit off. So if I wanted more of a daytime look, I would bring this up myself to somewhere around there. So the last thing that we have right above the white balance is a little meter, and that is for the exposure compensation or the exposure. So if I go back to shutter speed and I start adjusting this, you'll see that number flash. You'll see that number change right above the little white balance symbol. Now it's a red plus 2.0. That means that it's 2 stops or greater overexposed. And that's overexposed by what it thinks is overexposed. And then the opposite, if I slide the other way, so now it's saying it is, so if I get it right to the 0, that's where it thinks is a proper exposure. And then if I drop it down even more, then you're going to start seeing the negative number. So now it thinks that it's negative 1.3 stops under, 1 1/3 stop under. And then it only goes to -2, plus or -2. So that's just there to help you kind of figure out what it thinks is the proper exposure. Again, based on your lighting situation, that may be different than what you actually need, which is why we have Pro mode. So that's super handy to have. So the next thing we have over here above the settings in the bottom left is the flash. Now the flash in Pro mode only has an on and an off. A lot of people commented saying, why isn't there an auto and flash? Well, it's because you're in Pro mode and you're determining the values for everything. So it's either going to be an on or an off. It's not going to be, there's no auto function for the flash in Pro mode. So the next option we have is a timer option, and we can go from no timer to 2, 5 second or 10-second timer. And that'll help you if you want to do selfies and get in front, if you want to do reduce the shake or anything like that. And the timer is kind of redundant these days because you can turn the voice control on here. I can go into the settings and I can go into shoot methods, and then I can enable this voice control to where if I say capture or shoot or whatever, the camera will go off. And that's really handy. I use that a lot, especially when I'm doing long exposures or something like that where I don't want the camera shaking from me pushing it. So you can either use the timer or you can use the voice capture or whatever. I've had issues, if you guys saw my the last video I did with shooting long exposures and the super bloom and all that with the S20 Plus landscape challenge, I tried to put the tripod up and hold it and then yell capture, and it was windy like this and it just wasn't working. And the camera was a good whatever this tripod is, about 5 feet above my head, and I'm holding it up there trying to yell capture, and it didn't work. And I didn't put that part in the video, but a lot of you guys like slammed me thinking that I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Telling me to turn the capture on, and it's like I did and it didn't work, so I had to use the timer. But it's good that there's redundant options like that, because if one doesn't work, then you can try the other one. But that's the voice capture, that's the timer. The next thing up here is the aspect ratio, so you can decide which aspect ratio you want to shoot in. Traditionally, DSLRs and all that stuff is more akin to the 4x3. Actually, I think my DSLR is 3x2, but 4x3 is the size of the sensor. So it's the actual sensor size. It's the biggest aspect ratio and the highest resolution you're going to get. But if you want to shoot in a 16:9 and not have to crop it later, then it will crop in on the image to the 16:9. Or if you want to shoot 1:1 and at least frame up like your Instagram stuff, then you can do that as well. Or you can shoot the full size of the phone, which is not the full size of the sensor, it's the full size of the phone's aspect ratio, which is a little bit wider than 16:9. So I usually leave it in 4x3 mode and get the highest resolution set and the most out of my image, and then I'll just crop it in post if and when I need to. All right, so that's Pro mode. That's the settings in a nutshell. That's how everything looks and works. So let's talk about how I personally use it and when I would use it. So the first thing I love doing with Pro mode is long exposure stuff, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do that, but I love doing shots like this where I do waterfalls, and this is actually from a video that I did with the S20. So if you haven't seen that, you can check that out if you want to see how I created those images with the waterfalls. But basically that's all shutter speed, and you need an ND filter, which is like what I'm using here. So if I rotate this, now I'm super dark. And that's because I have an ND filter on here, and that is filtering out the light and making it darker. So that's really handy when you want to slow the shutter speed down in the middle of the daytime and get those smooth waterfall shots. Another thing that I really love doing with it, and again, I made a video on this, is images like this. And these are nice long exposure blends. So this is actually a blend from a time lapse that I did, but I still used the long exposure feature and Pro mode, and I still used the Pro mode to control my shutter speed and to make a nice time lapse. And then I took all of the images from that time lapse and blended them together. I will be making a separate video on how to do that in Photoshop. But but that's a separate video. But just know that you can do long exposures during the daytime with waterfalls, with seascapes, with clouds, all that stuff. You do need some extra gear. You need an ND filter of some kind. I have lots of videos on those too, and I have more videos coming up about that as well. My next favorite thing to do with Pro Mode, especially now with the S20, since I discovered that it does pretty well, is photographing the stars and the Milky Way and all that stuff. So if you haven't seen that video yet, you should definitely check it out, because I think it's pretty cool that the S20 can do this now, and that Samsung is finally catching up to some of the other phones in their ability to capture the Milky Way and stars and stuff like that. Future Brent here. So I made it back. I finished the video already, but there was one thing that I forgot to mention about Pro Mode, and that's the negative, and that is the fact that you can only use the main lens, the 26mm equivalent. You can't use the ultra wide or the telephoto lens yet. I've talked about that before in a lot of other videos, and it's unfortunate that Samsung has done that, and the only way around it really is to get third-party lenses. And I basically use my Moment lenses for those. I've done a lot of videos about the Moment lenses and about how I get around that. So if you want to check those out, the link's in the description below. And I will be doing some more videos on how I'm using the Moment lenses, especially the wide angle with the Pro Mode and the Samsung S20 specifically. So, all right, back to the regular video. So those are the main reasons why I personally use Pro Mode, and when I use it and how I use it. There are a lot of other reasons you might want to use Pro Mode though, including just anytime you want to have control over the image, especially with the look of the image, in terms of not having Samsung control the compression and adding that extra saturation, contrast, and color profiles and sharpening and all of that. So if you want to take portraits or whatever, and you don't want to use live focus, and you don't want just all the JPEG stuff crushing your images, then Pro Mode is a really great option for that, because it will let you set everything, and it will not apply as heavily all of that sharpening and everything. And that's really nice to have. So basically anytime you want control over the image and the settings and all of that, you want to use Pro Mode. If you're doing landscape stuff and you have a beautiful landscape area, even if it's not a long exposure or whatever, then throw it into Pro Mode and do your settings yourself. That way you have that raw image to edit. That's the other biggest advantage of Pro Mode, is having that ability to save the raw files and edit those DNGs. And you can either do that on your computer in Photoshop or Lightroom or Luminar or whatever, Capture One or whatever you use. And then, or you can also do that on the phone. Programs like Snapseed, Lightroom Mobile, Photoshop Express, they all handle the raw DNG files from that. And I've done a lot of videos on that too, where my phone photo challenges and stuff, you can check those out and you can see how I would edit the raw files on the phones. So that is a very powerful tool to have all of that data, and for it to just be straight out of camera, and then you can go straight into the editing process. So I'm gonna wrap it up here before the wind starts blowing me and my cameras away. It's time for second breakfast. If you have any questions about anything that I went over or forgot to go over concerning the Pro Mode, make sure you leave those in the comments below, and I'll answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I have new videos every week. Hit that like button if the video helped you out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.